My key wouldn't turn in Grandpa's front door. I tried it twice before the door swung open, and my younger sister Brooke stared at me from inside, surrounded by moving boxes. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She folded her arms. "Moving into my house." I actually laughed. "Your house?" Brooke stepped closer. "Mom finally stopped pretending you deserved everything just because you're the oldest." My stomach tightened. "Brooke, get your things out until we know who legally owns this place." Her face hardened. "No, Mom and Dad chose me. The daughter who actually deserves it. My father has been dead for 6 years. Don't use him to justify this." Brooke's smile disappeared. Then she held up a key ring and said, "Mom changed the locks because she knew you'd cause a scene." I looked past her at Grandpa's furniture already being moved. "You had the locks changed before telling me? You don't live here, Naomi. You don't get a vote." That did it. I stepped onto the porch instead of backing away. "Show me the deed." Brooke scoffed. "Mom said you signed your half away years ago." "I never signed anything." For the first time, she hesitated. Then my phone rang. "Mom." I answered on speaker. Her voice came sharp and immediate. "Naomi, leave your sister alone. The house is hers now. Then send me the document where I gave up my ownership." Silence. I heard Mom breathe in. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "You're the strong one. Brooke needs this more." I stared at my sister. There it was. Not a deed. Not a signature. The same excuse they had used to take from me my entire life. I hung up. Brooke snapped. "Where are you going?" I turned back. To find out what Grandpa actually signed. The next morning, his old attorney called. He had found the original deed. My mother's name was on it. So was mine. And once I saw the date, I realized Mom hadn't just chosen Brooke over me. She had known the truth for years. 24 hours earlier, I had still believed my mother when she told me I was going to Grandpa's house to look at insurance paperwork. That was the embarrassing part. Not that I had been fooled. That after 38 years, I still hadn't learned to question why a small favor from my family somehow required me to cancel whatever I had planned. Mom had called while I was finishing coffee before work. "There are some papers at Grandpa's place I don't understand," she said. "Something about the insurance renewal." "What papers?" "I don't know, Naomi. That's why I'm asking you." I checked the clock. "I have a meeting at 10. "It won't take long." That phrase had consumed entire weekends of my life. I should have recognized it. Instead, I said, "I can stop by after work." Mom exhaled, relieved in the way she always did when I agreed to become useful again. "I knew I could count on you." For most of my life, those 6 words had worked better than any command. I knew I could count on you. When Brooke needed someone to drive 3 hours because her car broke down. When Dad needed help organizing bills after surgery. When Mom needed Thanksgiving dinner saved because she had invited 18 people and bought enough food for 10. When Brooke needed somewhere to stay after her first engagement ended. When Grandpa's foundation cracked 12 years ago and everybody suddenly became very interested in the fact that I was good with spreadsheets, contractors, and keeping people from killing each other over money. I was the daughter people counted on. Brooke was the daughter people worried about. It had taken me nearly 4 decades to understand that those were not equal privileges. That afternoon, I left the university a little after 5. I worked in labor relations, which sounded far more dramatic than most days actually were. My job was usually less about shouting matches and more about taking 5 different versions of the same event, putting dates beside them, and figuring out where reality had split from interpretation. People lied sometimes. More often, they simply remembered the version that protected them. I was good at hearing the difference. At work, anyway. Family had always been harder. Grandpa's house sat about 30 minutes outside Madison on a quiet street lined with old maples. He had bought it decades ago, before the neighborhood became the kind of place where modest houses suddenly appeared online with numbers that made everyone stare. The last appraisal I had heard mentioned put it somewhere near $800,000. But when I pulled into the driveway, I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about the fact that there was a moving truck parked beside Brooke's SUV. I stopped my car. For several seconds, I just stared. 2 men carried a pale upholstered chair through the front door. Another box sat on the porch, marked bedroom clothes in Brooke's handwriting. I got out slowly. My old key was still on my ring. Grandpa had given it to me years ago, because I was the one most likely to come over when something needed fixing. The brass was worn smooth at the edges. I slid it into the lock. It stopped halfway. I frowned and tried again. That was when the door opened. Brooke stood there in leggings, a cream sweater, and the expression she used whenever she had already made a decision and wanted everyone else to treat it as inevitable. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She gave me a short laugh. "Moving. I can see that." She stepped back enough for me to see the foyer. Grandpa's old walnut console table had been pushed against the wall. The framed photograph of him and Grandma that had sat on it for as long as I could remember was gone. In its place was one of Brooke's white ceramic lamps. Something cold moved under my ribs. "Where's Grandpa's picture?" "In a box." "Naomi, please don't start." I looked at her. "Start what?" She crossed her arms. This. This what?" "The whole thing where you walk in and act like you're in charge because you're older." I almost laughed. Instead, I held up my key. "Why doesn't this work?" Brooke reached into the pocket of her sweater and brought out a newer key ring. "Mom changed the locks." "When?" "Last week. And nobody thought I should know?" "You don't live here." "That wasn't my question." Her mouth tightened. There was a time when that expression would have made me soften my voice. Brooke had always been sensitive. That was Mom's word. Sensitive meant we lowered our voices when Brooke was angry. Sensitive meant we didn't bring up money she owed when she was overwhelmed. Sensitive meant, if she cried during an argument, everyone stopped discussing what she had done and started discussing how we had made her feel. I had been assigned the opposite role. Reasonable. Strong. Independent. Words that sounded flattering until you realized they meant no one had to make room for your pain. Brooke leaned against the door frame. "Mom said I could move in." "Mom owns the house now?" Her eyes shifted. "Mom and Dad always intended it for me." "Dad." My father had been dead for 6 years. I felt my jaw tighten. Don't use Dad as proof for something he can't answer. Brooke's expression hardened immediately. "You know what? This is exactly why Mom didn't want to tell you until I was settled." The sentence landed strangely. "Until you were settled?" She looked away. I heard one of the movers dragging something across the hardwood inside. "What does that mean?" "It means she knew you'd turn it into a whole legal argument." "Brooke, who owns this house?" She rolled her eyes. "I do now." "Show me." "Show you what?" "The deed." "You seriously want me to go digging through paperwork while movers are here? If you're telling me you own an $800,000 house?" "Yes." Her face flushed. "Mom already handled it." "Then what did she show you?" "A deed." "Which deed?" "I don't know." "The deed." "What date?" "For God's sake, Naomi." That answer mattered. Not because Brooke was stupid. She wasn't. She ran a freelance event styling business. She negotiated venues, deposits, cancellation terms, vendor contracts. She knew paper mattered when paper affected her, which meant she had decided not to look too closely here. That was different, and somehow worse. She folded her arms tighter. "Mom told me you signed away whatever interest you had years ago." The anger left me so fast it almost felt like calm. "I did what?" "You heard me." "No, tell me exactly what she said." Brooke sighed dramatically. "She said Grandpa had changed things at one point, but after he died you signed your part back because you didn't want the responsibility." "I never signed anything." For the first time since opening the door, Brooke stopped looking certain. Only for a second. Then she recovered. "Well, Mom said you did. And you never asked me?" "Why would I?" That one hurt more than I expected. I looked at my sister, 32 years old. Smart enough to run her own business. Old enough to understand that a house was not a sweater. Mom had decided one daughter needed more. "You were going to move your entire life into this place without asking me whether I had signed away hundreds of thousands of dollars?" Brooke's chin lifted. "You never wanted this house. You don't know what I wanted. You have your career, your condo, your perfect little organized life. I rent my condo. You know what I mean." "No, actually, I'm starting to realize I don't." One of the movers appeared behind her. "Ma'am, where do you want the dining table?" Brooke turned. "Dining room." Then she looked back at me. You can help us shift it. You know Grandpa had those felt pads somewhere. The request was so absurd, I almost missed what it represented. She had just told me I had no say in the house. Then, without taking a breath, she expected me to help move furniture into it. The old version of me would have done it. I knew that with humiliating certainty. I would have told myself the movers were charging by the hour. I would have told myself the table was Grandpa's, and I didn't want it scratched. I would have told myself helping Brooke move did not mean I agreed with her. Mostly, I would have helped, because refusing would make everything more uncomfortable. And my whole life had been organized around making sure everybody else stayed comfortable. I put the useless brass key back into my purse. No. Brooke blinked. What? No, I'm not helping you move. You're seriously going to stand there while… I'm not standing here either. I stepped backward off the porch. That was when my phone rang. Mom. I answered on speaker. Naomi, she said before I could speak. Leave your sister alone. Brooke looked almost relieved. I glanced at her, then at the open door behind her. Mom, did you change the locks? A pause. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because Brooke needed a clean start, and I knew you would make this difficult. Who owns the house? Another pause. Then Mom's voice became soft. Dangerously soft. Naomi, please don't do this. Do what? Turn everything into a fight over money. I asked who owns the house. You know what your grandfather wanted. No. I know what people have told me he wanted. Brooke gave an irritated laugh. Mom heard it. Brooke has had an awful year, she said. Her relationship fell apart. Her income has been unpredictable. She needs stability. None of that answered my question. Did I sign away an ownership interest? You're doing it again. Doing what? Interrogating everybody instead of looking at the bigger picture. What bigger picture? You have a stable career. Brooke doesn't. You're the strong one. I shut my eyes. There it was. I was 17 again, holding my car keys while Mom explained why I needed to leave my own birthday dinner to pick Brooke up from a party. You're the strong one. I was 23, holding an acceptance letter for a fellowship in Chicago, while Dad said Brooke was having a difficult semester and Mom needed help. You'll have other chances. I was 29, moving boxes into my apartment after Brooke's engagement collapsed. She just needs somewhere safe for a while. Every time, the same equation. Brooke's need became a fact. My sacrifice became a personality trait. I opened my eyes. Send me the document. Mom went quiet. What document? The one where I signed away my interest. Oh, Naomi. Send it. I'm not doing this with you while you're worked up. That nearly made me laugh. My voice was the calmest one on the call. Then we'll talk after I've checked the records. Naomi, don't punish your sister, because your grandfather changed his mind. I looked at Brooke. What exactly did he change his mind about? Mom didn't answer. Instead she said, You don't need that house. Something in me went still. Not broke. Not exploded. Just stopped moving. For years, I had answered that sentence. I had explained what I needed. Why something mattered. Why I was allowed to want it even if Brooke wanted it too. This time I didn't. I'll call you when I have facts. I hung up. Brooke stared at me. Where are you going? To find out what Grandpa actually signed. Then I walked back to my car. I didn't slam the door. I didn't peel out of the driveway. I sat behind the wheel with both hands resting on it and listened to my own breathing. The temptation to call Mom back was immediate. Explain. Reassure. Tell her I wasn't trying to take anything from Brooke. Tell Brooke she could stay temporarily while we sorted things out. Find a compromise before anyone had even admitted there was a dispute. That was what I did for a living. But there was a difference between mediation and surrender. At work, both sides were supposed to have a voice. In my family, compromise usually meant I entered the room with something and left without it. I drove home. That evening, I opened my laptop at the small dining table in my condo. Mom had already sent 3 messages. Please don't involve strangers in family business. Then, Brooke is crying. Then, your father would hate seeing you two like this. I stared at the last one longer than I should have. Dad had been gone 6 years, and somehow he was still being assigned opinions whenever Mom needed extra votes. I did not respond. Instead, I called the law office Grandpa had used. The receptionist found his name in an old client file. The attorney who had handled some of his estate work was semi-retired, but still came in several days a week. When he returned my call, I kept my words careful. My grandfather owned a house on Hawthorne Lane. I need to verify how title was structured when he died. He asked my name. When I told him, there was a pause. Naomi Carter? Yes. I remember your grandfather talking about you. My throat tightened unexpectedly. What did he say? The attorney gave a small laugh. Mostly that you were the one who read things before signing them. That sounded like Grandpa. I looked down at the blank notebook beside me. I'm trying to do that now. He told me he would need to retrieve the archived file and cross-check the recorded information. It may take until tomorrow. That's fine. After we hung up, I drew 3 columns on the page. What I know. Brooke moved in. Locks changed. Mom authorized it. Brooke was shown a deed. Mom claimed I signed away an interest. Then, what I was told. Brooke owns the house. Dad wanted Brooke to have it. I never wanted it. I signed away my rights. Then, what needs verification? Current ownership. Recorded deed. Any transfer carrying my signature. Mailing address. Tax records. Insurance correspondence. He sat back. It looked exactly like the kind of sheet I used in difficult mediations. At work, I trusted that process. At home, I had spent 38 years trusting tone of voice instead. My phone buzzed again. Family group chat. Aunt Claire. Naomi, please think about what you're doing to your mother. Another cousin. Brooke finally has some stability. Why can't you be happy for her? Then Brooke. I can't believe you're threatening my home because you're jealous. My fingers went to the keyboard. I typed, I have never threatened to remove you. I asked for documentation because I stopped. Read it. Deleted it. Then muted the thread. The silence afterward felt unnatural. Almost irresponsible. I went to bed expecting guilt to keep me awake. Instead, for the first time in years, I let other adults stay upset without appointing myself to fix it. At 9:12, the next morning, my phone rang. Grandpa's attorney. I found the deed package, he said. I stood from my desk and closed my office door. What does it say? Your grandfather retained the right to occupy the property during his lifetime. After that, the recorded interest passed in equal shares. My mouth went dry. To whom? Janice Carter. I waited. And Naomi Carter. For a moment, I heard nothing except the ventilation above my office. Me? You. 50%? That is what this instrument reflects. I still want current county records confirmed before you make decisions based on it. Of course. He kept talking, but my eyes had gone to the notebook beside my keyboard. Mom had known Grandpa handled property paperwork carefully. Mom had handled taxes. Mom had handled insurance. Mom had told Brooke I signed my part away. I forced myself not to jump past what I could prove. Can you send me a copy? Yes. A few minutes later, the PDF arrived. I opened it. Walter Bennett. Janice Carter. And then, there it was, my full legal name. Naomi Elaine Carter. Not a promise. Not, someday. Not, Grandpa always said. Ink. A recorded date. My name. My phone buzzed. Brooke. Mom says that deed doesn't matter. You signed your half away after Grandpa died. I stared at the message. Then back at the deed. There was only one problem. I had never signed my half away. Not 6 years ago. Not ever. And for the first time, the question I needed answered wasn't why my sister thought she deserved my house. It was why my mother needed both of us to believe I had willingly disappeared from it. The next morning, the deed sat open on my screen while a union representative across the conference table told me everyone in the room already knew what had happened. They know, he said, tapping 2 fingers against the folder in front of him. Management knows. We know. There's no reason to keep going in circles. Across from him, the department chair leaned back. That's not what happened. The representative laughed once. There, exactly. 6 people turned toward me. For a moment, all I could see was another table, another argument, Another group of people insisting their version should matter more, because they said it with greater confidence. I uncapped my pen. If everybody knows what happened, I said, then dates shouldn't be difficult. The room quieted. I drew a line down the center of my legal pad. When was the schedule changed? The department chair gave me a date. When was the employee notified? A different date. When did the supervisor say the conversation occurred? The representative stopped tapping his folder. That's not the same day. No, I said. It isn't. We spent the next hour separating what people believed from what could actually be established. No dramatic confession. No one suddenly became reasonable because I asked nicely. But by the end, both sides were arguing about the same set of facts instead of two different histories. That was usually enough to begin. As everyone filed out, Elena stayed behind. She was my supervisor, though most days she treated me more like a colleague who happened to approve my leave requests. You're good at that, she said. At making 6 adults resent calendars? At making them stop hiding behind certainty. I closed my folder. She leaned against the edge of the table. Did you look at the director posting? I knew exactly which one. Director of Conflict Systems. More responsibility, more money, more travel between campuses, a chance to build processes instead of spending every week cleaning up after systems that had already failed. I saw it. That wasn't my question. I smiled despite myself. I haven't applied. The deadline's Friday. I know. Elena studied me for a second, then nodded. I'm not going to talk you into it. Just make sure you're saying no because you don't want the job, not because someone else might need you available. The comment landed too close to something I hadn't told her. I slipped my notebook into my bag. I'll think about it. Back in my office, the deed was still open on my second monitor. Naomi Elaine Carter. There was my name. It looked almost accusatory now. I zoomed in on the mailing information and felt a new question rise. If my name had been tied to the property for 6 years, why had I never received a property tax bill? Not once. No notice from the county. No insurance renewal. No assessment letter. Nothing that would have forced me to ask why my name belonged anywhere near Grandpa's house. That bothered me more than I wanted it to. I called the attorney. He answered after the second ring. I was hoping you'd call, he said. I have the current record request moving. I have another question. Go ahead. If I had an ownership interest after Grandpa died, why wasn't I getting the tax notices? There was a brief sound of paper shifting. The deed package lists a mailing address for tax correspondence. Mine? No. My fingers tightened around the phone. Whose? Your mother's. I stared through the glass wall of my office at people walking past with coffee cups and laptops. Can that happen? It can. The mailing address associated with a property doesn't have to mean every owner receives separate copies. I'm not telling you what anyone intended by that. I'm telling you what's in the record. That distinction mattered. I wrote it down. What about insurance? I have some older correspondence in the file, but I haven't reviewed all of it yet. Please don't interpret it for me. He paused. All right, just send me what you can verify. After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand. Then a memory surfaced. Not dramatically. No flash of revelation. Just my mother, standing at Grandpa's kitchen counter after his funeral, stacking envelopes into neat piles while I washed coffee mugs nobody had asked me to wash. There's enough set aside to take care of the house for a while, she had said. I remembered asking about taxes. Mom waved one hand. I'm handling that. Insurance too. You have enough on your plate. At the time, gratitude had loosened something in my chest. For once, I had thought, somebody was taking something off my list. Now I wondered why I had never asked what list she had taken it from. My phone buzzed. Mom. I let it ring. A message appeared a few seconds later. Dinner tonight. We need to resolve this before it gets uglier. I stared at the word resolve. At work, resolution meant both sides understood what they were agreeing to. At home, it had usually meant everyone waited until I gave something up. I typed back. I'll come. I'm not signing anything tonight. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. No response. That silence told me more than an argument would have. Later that afternoon, I pulled the old records I still had from the foundation repair 12 years earlier. I kept too much paperwork. Brooke had laughed about it for years. Mom called it obsessive. Dad used to tease that if the house burned down, I would probably rescue the receipts first. The folder was in a storage box at the back of my bedroom closet. Dust caught at the edge of the cardboard when I pulled it free. Inside were estimates, invoices, bank statements, and a spreadsheet I had printed because Grandpa preferred paper. I sat cross-legged on the floor. The total was higher than I remembered. Not enough to claim I had bought the house. Not even close. That was never the point. But I had contributed more than anyone had ever mentioned afterward. Money from a bonus. Vacation days. Hours spent calling contractors because Grandpa hated being talked down to, and Mom said Dad was too busy to deal with construction people. Brooke had been in graduate school then. Every time money came up, the same answer arrived. Brooke needs to focus. You're already established. You'll recover faster. I found a canceled check with my handwriting. Then another. The memory attached to them came back in pieces. Grandpa sitting at the kitchen table with his reading glasses low on his nose. He had looked at the spreadsheet I made and said, "You know more about this repair than the contractor does." "I know more about this repair than I ever wanted to." He had smiled. Then he asked, "Did your parents thank you?" I remembered laughing. Their family. His smile had disappeared. At 26, I had thought he was being old-fashioned and dramatic. At 38, I heard the question differently. Did they thank you? Not did they love you. Not did they need you. Did they recognize what you gave? I closed the folder. The answer was no. But another answer mattered more. I had given it voluntarily. That meant I could stop. By 6:30, Mom's dining room smelled like rosemary chicken and the lemon polish she used whenever company was coming. Aunt Claire's coat hung by the door. So much for a private dinner. Brooke was already seated. Her hair was pulled into a loose knot, and dark half-moons sat under her eyes. For half a second, instinct tugged at me. Ask if she slept. Ask if she needs anything. Then I remembered the moving boxes. The lock. The sentence about deserving the house. I hung my coat and sat down. Mom placed a serving dish on the table. I invited Claire because I thought we might need someone neutral. Aunt Claire gave me an apologetic smile. I looked at Mom. You invited someone who heard your version before I arrived. Her lips tightened. See? This is what I mean. Everything has to sound like an accusation with you now. I reached for my water. What are we resolving? Brooke pushed food around her plate. Mom sat down. The house. Good. That seemed to surprise her. I opened the folder I had brought and placed it beside my plate. I have the deed Grandpa recorded. I'm waiting on current confirmation. Aunt Claire blinked. Your mother said it was an old deed. It is an older document. That doesn't make it irrelevant. Mom put down her fork. Naomi, your grandfather changed things more than once. I know. And you told us you didn't want the responsibility. I may have said I didn't want to live there. You did. That isn't the same as transferring ownership. Brooke let out a sharp breath. Why are you acting like we're in court? I'm asking what document everyone is relying on. Mom's voice softened. You're upset. There was the maneuver. Shift from the question to my emotional state. I folded my hands in my lap. Show me the document where I transferred my interest. Mom glanced at Brooke. Then Aunt Claire. Then back at me. Not everything in a family is a transaction. I almost smiled. Then don't ask me to transfer property. Brooke's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Aunt Claire stared at her plate. Mom's face changed. Not much. Just enough. The softness left. You always have to make everything sound so cold. I'm asking for the paperwork supporting what you told Brooke. She needed somewhere to live. That's a different issue. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. Brooke put her fork down. I just got out of a 6-year relationship, Naomi. I know. My business had 2 cancellations last month. I know. I can't qualify for the kind of place you could. There it was. The old scale. Her need placed on one side. My rights on the other. I looked at her. I'm sorry you're in a difficult position. She stared at me. But your housing problem does not automatically transfer my ownership to you. Mom pushed back from the table. That is such an ugly way to say it. What would be prettier? Compassion. The word landed like a command. Aunt Claire finally spoke. Maybe there's a temporary solution. My mother stood and walked to the sideboard. She returned with a slim document folder. There is. She placed it in front of me. I didn't touch it immediately. What is it? A transfer. Brooke looked at Mom, then at me. You sign your share over. Brooke gets stability. We stop tearing each other apart. My eyes moved from the folder to Mom's face. You've been telling everyone I already signed my share away. Her expression froze. So why do you need me to sign another transfer? No one spoke. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. Mom recovered first. That isn't the point. It's exactly the point. You're twisting words. No, I'm comparing them. Her hand flattened against the table. You said years ago you didn't want the house. That is not a deed. You said you didn't need it. That is not a transfer. You have a career. That is not my signature. Brooke looked from me to Mom. The certainty she had worn at Grandpa's door had thinned. Mom noticed. Her voice sharpened. Brooke, don't let her confuse you. This is what she does for a living. I turned toward my sister. I'm not asking you to believe me. Mom's jaw tightened. I continued. I'm asking you to show me what you were shown. Brooke looked away. Mom answered for her. She doesn't have to produce evidence like she's on trial. I didn't ask you. That silenced the table. Mom rarely heard that from me. Not because she answered every question. Because I usually allowed her to. She leaned toward me. Sign the paper, Naomi. I opened the folder. The language was formal and dry. A transfer of my interest. Exactly what I had asked about from the beginning. The signature line waited at the bottom. Naomi Elaine Carter. For years, I had signed forms Mom put in front of me, after hearing only enough explanation to understand what she wanted. Medical releases. Contractor approvals. Payment authorizations. Nothing illegal. Nothing sinister. Just a pattern in which efficiency mattered more than my questions. I closed the folder. I'm not signing. Brooke's chair scraped the floor. So what am I supposed to do? I don't know yet. You don't know? No. You're the one causing this. No. I'm the one refusing to surrender an asset before I know why everyone was told I already surrendered it. Mom's eyes narrowed. So you're willing to make your sister homeless? I felt the old reflex surge. Offer the condo. Offer money. Offer time. Produce a solution before anyone had to sit with discomfort. I let the silence stay. Brooke being housed and me giving away my ownership are two separate problems. Mom stared at me as if I had switched languages. I stood. Send me whatever document you believe proves I transferred my share. Sit down. No. Naomi. I came because you said you wanted to resolve this. You brought me a paper to sign instead of the paper you claim already exists. Aunt Claire shifted uncomfortably. Mom's cheeks colored. You're humiliating me in my own home. I picked up my folder. No. I'm leaving your home without signing away mine. The guilt hit before I reached the front door. Not regret. Guilt. They were different, though I had spent most of my life confusing them. In my car, I sat with both hands around the steering wheel until my breathing settled. Then I did something I had almost never done after a family argument. I did not call anybody. Not Brooke. Not Aunt Claire. Not Mom. I drove home. On my kitchen table, my laptop was still open to the Director of Conflict Systems application. I filled in another section, Professional Philosophy. I stared at the prompt for a long time before typing. Sustainable resolution requires clear information, shared expectations, and systems that do not depend on one person absorbing every failure. I read the sentence twice, then saved the application. Not submitted. Not yet, but still there. The next evening, Brooke texted me. Can we talk without Mom? I answered. Yes. She called a few minutes later. For once, neither of us began with an accusation. I found the picture, she said. What picture? The deed Mom showed me. My chair creaked when I sat straighter. Send it. Naomi. What? I'm telling you now, I didn't make this up. I didn't say you did. You think I'm an idiot. No. I think you believed something you wanted to believe. Silence. That had landed. Finally, she said, "Maybe." My phone vibrated. An image appeared. I opened it. The document looked legitimate. Grandpa's name, property description, recording information, Janice's name. No Naomi Carter. My pulse quickened. For one dangerous second, I wondered if the attorney had misunderstood something. Then training took over. Don't interpret first. Compare. I opened Grandpa's deed on my laptop. Put the two documents side by side. Same property. Different instrument numbers. Different dates. I looked again. The deed Brooke had been shown was 3 years older. Brooke. What? When did Mom tell you this document was recorded? She didn't. Did she tell you it was the final deed? Yes. My eyes stayed on the dates. What exactly did she say about me? Brooke hesitated. She said Grandpa changed things around for a while because you helped with the house. Then after he died, you handled your release privately with her. Did she show you my release? No. Did you ask? The silence told me the answer. Why not? Brooke's voice dropped. Because she sounded certain. That wasn't enough. We both knew it. She added more quietly. And because I wanted the house. There it was. Not innocence. Not conspiracy. Something more ordinary. Someone had given my sister a version of the truth that rewarded her, and she had chosen not to look behind it. I enlarged the older deed. The paper was real. The recording stamp was real. The names were real. That was what made the lie work. It didn't require inventing a document. It only required showing Brooke the one that came before mine. I looked at the newer deed again. 3 years later, Naomi Elaine Carter. For the first time since this began, I stopped wondering whether Brooke had taken something from me. A colder question had replaced it. Why had our mother needed her to believe I was never really there? The question stayed with me all night. Why had Mom needed Brooke to believe I was never really there? By morning, the answer still wasn't clear, but the shape of the problem had changed. Brooke had not shown me a forged document. She had shown me a real deed from an earlier point in Grandpa's ownership history. That mattered. A lie built around something genuine was harder to recognize because you could touch the proof and still reach the wrong conclusion. At 8:30, an email from Grandpa's attorney appeared in my inbox. The county record had been confirmed. I closed my office door before opening the attachments. The current ownership information matched the deed package he had already sent me. After Grandpa's retained right to occupy the property ended, the interest was divided equally. Janice Carter. Naomi Carter. 1/2 each. I scrolled farther. There was no later recorded transfer removing my name. No document showing that I had conveyed my interest to Mom. No mysterious release after Grandpa died. I called the attorney. So, unless there's something outside what you found, the current record still shows me? That's what the record reflects, he said. And Brooke has been shown an older deed. Yes. Can an old deed just become meaningless because a new one exists? Not meaningless. It's part of the property history. But it doesn't tell you the final ownership position by itself. I wrote that down. He continued. I want to be careful here, Naomi. I can tell you what the documents establish. I can't tell you why your mother showed your sister one document rather than another. I understand. And I still haven't reviewed every item in your grandfather's archived correspondence. Please send me anything involving the house, insurance, or Mom. I'll do that. When the call ended, I looked at the two deeds side by side again. The older one Brooke had been shown, the later one with my name. There was no mystery about which document came last. The mystery was why Mom had spent so much energy pretending chronology did not matter. A knock sounded against my office door. Elena leaned in. You have 5 minutes? Sure. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The director application closes tomorrow. I know. You say that every time I mention it. I also know that. Her mouth curved. I'm not checking whether you've decided. I'm reminding you that not deciding is also a decision. I leaned back in my chair. That sounds suspiciously like something I would say to somebody else. That's why I enjoyed saying it. She left before I could answer. The application tab was still open on my browser. I glanced at it, then back at the property documents. For years, every serious decision in my life seemed to come with an invisible second question. What happens if Mom needs me? What happens if Brooke falls apart? What happens if everybody gets angry while I'm gone? The director position would require more travel between campuses, more responsibility, more days when I could not drop everything because somebody in my family had turned discomfort into an emergency. I minimized the application. Not closed. Minimized. Then I opened a new spreadsheet. At work, when two people arrived with incompatible stories, I did not begin by asking which person seemed more sincere. Sincerity was not a calendar. So I created 4 columns. Date. What the record showed. What Mom had told me. What Mom had told Brooke. The first rows were simple. The older deed. The later deed. Grandpa's death. The tax correspondence going to Mom's address. Brooke's breakup. The locks being changed. The move-in. Then the verbal claims. Mom had told me Brooke needed stability. Mom had told Brooke I had already given up my interest. Mom had told me Grandpa expected me to help my sister. Mom had told Brooke I had agreed she could move in. I stopped typing. That last line had come from Brooke, not from anything I had seen. I called her. She answered after several rings. What? Did Mom tell you I knew you were moving into Grandpa's house? A pause. Yes. What exactly did she say? Brooke Sahil. Naomi, I'm working. So when then why are we doing this now? Because I'm putting together what each of us was told. Her voice sharpened. You're making a case against Mom. No, I'm making a timeline. That's the same thing when you do it. I ignored that. Did she say I agreed to the move? Yes. Those words? She said you'd already walked away from the house, and that you weren't going to object. That's not the same as me agreeing. Well, she made it sound like it was settled. Did she tell you not to call me? Silence. My hand stopped over the keyboard. Brooke? She said there was no point. What did that mean? That you would make everything complicated. I looked at the spreadsheet. Did she say I knew when the locks were being changed? No. Did she tell you I knew movers were coming? No. Did she tell you I knew when you were moving in? Brooke's voice became quieter. She said you knew the house was going to me. That isn't what I asked. I know. The silence between us stretched. I could almost feel the old pattern trying to rebuild itself. Brooke defensive. Me prosecuting. Mom absent but somehow controlling the terms anyway. I changed the question. What did you believe when you put your first box inside? Brooke took a breath. That you had given it up. And that I knew you were moving? Yes. I closed my eyes. I didn't. I know that now. There was no apology in her voice yet. But there was less certainty. That was something. Anything concerning the house, I said. I'm not discussing through Mom anymore. Brooke gave a humorless laugh. You think I want to be in the middle? No. I think we've both been in the middle for years. She went quiet again. That sentence stayed with me after we hung up. Not because I knew it was true, because I suddenly wanted to test whether it was. I finished the spreadsheet and attached only documents I could verify. No accusation. No conclusions about intent. Then I emailed the same file to Mom and Brooke. My message was short. I wrote that I was trying to make sure all 3 of us were working from the same information. If either of them believed a line was wrong, they could correct it in the same email thread and attach whatever supported the correction. I hit send. Less than 2 minutes later, my phone rang. Mom. I watched it until voicemail picked up. She called again. Then came a text. Call me privately. I typed back. If it concerns the house and Brooke, please put it in the group email. Her response came instantly. Why are you treating your own mother like someone from one of your cases? I read it twice, then answered. Because separate conversations are making this worse. She did not reply. For the first time since Grandpa's house had become a battlefield, Mom had lost the ability to tell me what Brooke thought without Brooke hearing it. That afternoon, Brooke called again. I saw your spreadsheet. Okay. Mom is furious. I assumed. She says you're trying to make her look like a liar. I listed dates and statements. You know how it looks. That depends on whether the statements are accurate. Brooke groaned. This is exhausting. Yes. I mean you. The words stung, but not the way they once would have. I know. She seemed caught off guard. You know? I know I'm asking questions you don't want to answer. That's not what I meant. What did you mean? I mean, everything with you becomes exact. Dates, messages, what somebody said, what they meant. You never just let anything go. I turned my chair toward the window. Below, students crossed the quad under a pale gray sky. Brooke, did Mom tell you I thought you couldn't take care of yourself? Another pause. What? Did she? Yes. My stomach tightened. What did she say? That you've always thought I was irresponsible. I nearly laughed, but nothing about it was funny. A memory came back with the smell of roasted turkey and Mom's cinnamon candles. Thanksgiving. I was 27. Brooke had been struggling with money after moving into an apartment she could barely afford. A utility bill had gone unpaid long enough to become urgent. Mom called me into the laundry room while everyone else was watching football. Can you cover it? She whispered. How much? She told me. Why isn't Brooke asking me? She's embarrassed. I'll talk to her. No. Mom caught my wrist. Please don't. She already feels like a failure. Just help her quietly. I paid the bill. Never mentioned it. For years, I had remembered that moment as one of the kinder things I had done for my sister. Now Brooke was telling me there had been another version. Do you remember that Thanksgiving when your utilities were behind? I asked. Her voice changed. Yes. What did Mom tell you? That you found out and paid because you thought I couldn't manage my own money. I stared at the wall. No. What? She asked me to pay it. Brooke said nothing. She specifically told me not to tell you because you'd be embarrassed. That's not what she told me. I know. For once, neither of us rushed to fill the silence. The memory itself had not changed. I had paid the bill. Mom had asked. Brooke had needed help. But the meaning had been split down the middle. To me, I was protecting Brooke. To Brooke, I was judging her. And Mom had stood between us, translating one sister into the version the other was most likely to resent. How many times has this happened? Brooke asked. I don't know. That answer scared me more than if I had known. We agreed to meet after work the next day. Neutral ground, a coffee shop halfway between my office and Grandpa's house. Brooke arrived 10 minutes late in a camel coat and set her phone on the table before taking off her gloves. I don't want this to become you deciding I'm innocent, she said. That wasn't the plan. Her eyebrows lifted. You moved into that house without calling me. I know. You let me stand on the porch with a key that didn't work while you told me I had no vote. Her gaze dropped to the coffee between us. I thought you had signed it away. You chose not to verify that with me. I know. You wanted the house. Her mouth tightened. Yes. It was the first clean answer she had given me. No, Mom said. No, Dad wanted. No, I needed stability. Just yes. I did, Brooke continued. After Evan and I split, I was tired of short-term rentals. My work had been uneven. Mom told me Grandpa's place was supposed to be mine, and I wanted that to be true. Wanting it doesn't make what happened okay. I know. Good. She looked annoyed. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed once. You really don't make this easy. I spent most of my life making it easy. The laughter disappeared. Brooke unlocked her phone. There are messages. She scrolled. I didn't think they mattered before. She turned the screen toward me. The first message was from Mom, several weeks before Brooke moved. Don't ask Naomi again. She'll make this complicated. Another followed beneath it. Once you're settled, she won't make you leave. My fingers went cold against the paper cup. Send those to me. Brooke looked at me. You're going to use them against her. I'm going to keep them with the rest of the record. That sounds like the same thing. It isn't. She hesitated, then forwarded the screenshots. There was another message. She always gives in when someone needs her. I read it twice. Then a third time. The words did not prove Mom had planned every detail. They did prove something else. She had counted on me behaving exactly as I always had. Once Brooke was inside the house, distressed and dependent on staying there, Mom believed I would surrender rather than become the person who caused her more instability. The trap had not been legal. It had been emotional. Brooke watched my face. What? She expected me to solve this for you. That's what she always expects. No. I looked up. She expected me to solve it by giving up. Neither of us spoke for a while. On the drive home, the old resentment toward Brooke had not vanished. She had still moved into the house. She had still chosen the version that benefited her. But anger had become less convenient. It was easier when she was simply the golden child, and I was simply the daughter who lost. The more documents I collected, the more I saw something uglier than favoritism. A system worked better if Brooke and I never compared notes. The next morning, Grandpa's attorney emailed again. He had found additional correspondence from the old property file. There was a cover letter associated with the later deed. It had been sent to Mom. I read it carefully. Then I opened a second item. An email exchange after Grandpa died concerning updates to homeowners insurance. Mom's name was at the top. The attorney's office had asked for information related to the property. In her reply, Mom referred directly to my interest. Not vaguely. Not the girls. Not future arrangements. Naomi's interest. I read the line again, until the letters blurred. 6 years ago. She knew. There was no question left about whether Mom had forgotten the later deed. No reasonable confusion about which version came last. She knew my name was attached to the house. She knew when she told Brooke I had no remaining claim. She knew when she told relatives I was trying to take something from my sister. She knew when she put a transfer document in front of me and told me signing it would resolve everything. My phone buzzed before I had fully absorbed it. Voicemail. Mum. I played it. Her voice was controlled. We need a family meeting, Naomi. This has gone far enough, and you are going to stop turning your sister against me. I sat very still. That was what she thought was happening. Not two daughters comparing information. Not two documents with different dates. Not an ownership interest she had known about for 6 years. A loyalty contest. I opened the Director of Conflict Systems application. One section remained unfinished. The Submit button waited at the bottom. For the first time, I did not ask myself whether the house would be settled before the job changed my schedule. I did not wonder whether Mom would consider the timing selfish. I did not calculate how available Brooke might need me to be. I attached the last document. Read the application once. And clicked Submit. The confirmation email arrived before I had time to regret pressing Submit. Thank you for your application. For several seconds, that single sentence felt more dangerous than anything connected to Grandpa's house. There was no undo button hidden underneath it. No way to tell myself I would apply, after Mom calmed down, after Brooke found somewhere stable, after the property issue was settled, after the next emergency. The application existed now. So did the rest of my life. I closed the email and returned to work. By lunch, there were 4 missed calls from Mom. I didn't return any of them. Instead, I called the independent appraiser whose name I had been given after asking what a neutral valuation would require. Before scheduling anything, I sent the proposed appointment to Mom and Brooke in the same email thread. Brooke replied first. Fine with me. Mom waited almost 3 hours. Then, I don't see why strangers need to walk through Dad's house. I stared at the screen. Grandpa's house had become Dad's house now. Every few days, the language shifted, depending on which version made resisting me sound cruelest. I replied that knowing the approximate market value would help us discuss realistic options. Mom wrote back, there shouldn't be options. This was supposed to stay in the family. I almost answered that I was part of the family. The sentence sat under my fingers for several seconds. Then I deleted it. If I had to remind someone of that, every time I asked not to be erased, the argument was already answering itself. A week later, the appraiser walked through the house, while Brooke let him in. I attended because I wanted to hear any questions directly, but I stayed out of his way. The place looked different from the day I found Brooke moving in. The boxes had disappeared. Her coats hung in the front closet. A vase of pale eucalyptus stood where Grandpa used to keep his mail. The photograph of him and Grandma was back on the console table, though pushed toward one side. Brooke caught me looking at it. I put it back. I see that. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I didn't throw his things away, Naomi. I never said you did. You thought it. No. I wondered where they went. She looked irritated by the distinction. A month earlier, I might have softened it. Now I let it stand. The appraiser asked about renovations, roof age, windows, the foundation work. Brooke looked at me. I answered only what I knew. Foundation stabilization was done about 12 years ago. I have the contractor records if you need them. He nodded. That would help. Brooke leaned against the kitchen counter. You still have those? Yes. Of course you do. There was an old edge in her voice, but not enough force behind it to start a fight. The report arrived several days later. $815,000. I read the number twice. $400,000 and change, before expenses, was the rough value associated with my half. For a moment, the number was impossible not to feel. I had spent years worrying about whether I was saving enough for a down payment, while half of a property worth more than $800,000 had existed under my name. But the thought that followed mattered more. Mom knew. She had watched me plan around rent increases and emergency savings, while continuing to describe the house as something she could decide between her daughters. I opened a blank document and wrote down 3 practical paths. Mom could buy my half if she could finance it. I could consider buying hers if it made financial sense, and both of us wanted that. Or we could agree to sell. If none of those worked, I could get professional advice about the formal remedies available to co-owners. No threats. No grand declarations. Just options. I sent them in the shared thread. Mom did not respond there. Instead, Aunt Claire called me that evening. Are you really trying to sell Walter's house? I was standing at my kitchen counter, chopping an onion. Mom called you. She's upset. That wasn't my question. Claire Sahil. She said you gave her 3 choices. Like she was one of your employees. She has 3 choices, because there are 2 owners. Naomi. She's 63. The knife stopped against the cutting board. I know how old she is. And Brooke just went through a breakup. I know that too. You have a good job. I set the knife down. What does my salary have to do with who owns the house? Claire went quiet. Then she said, do you really need that much money? There it was again. Not whether the ownership record was accurate. Not whether Mom had lied. Whether I needed enough. As if rights shrank, according to how competent the person holding them appeared. I'm not going to discuss the house through other relatives, I said. I'm not trying to interfere. You're calling because Mom asked you to talk to me. Claire didn't answer. I love you, I continued. But if she has something to say about the property, she can put it in the same conversation Brooke and I can see. That sounds so formal. It needs to be. I ended the call before I could be pulled into defending that too. The onion still waited on the cutting board. For once, dinner had remained my dinner instead of becoming a casualty of somebody else's crisis. I finished cooking. The next call came from a cousin. I let it go to voicemail. Then an old friend of Dad's sent a message telling me Walter would have wanted the girls to work things out. The girls, 38 and 32, and somehow every disagreement still reduced us to children until one of us was expected to surrender. Mom waited until almost 10 that night to call. I answered because I wanted to hear what she would say when no relative stood between us. Her voice was quiet. Are you happy now? No. You've got Claire questioning me. Brooke barely speaks to me. Everybody is tense. I didn't call Claire. You know what I mean. I actually don't. A sharp breath crossed the line. You've turned this into a public spectacle. I haven't posted anything. I haven't sent documents to relatives. I haven't asked anyone to take my side. You sent that ridiculous chart to Brooke. The chronology. Don't correct me. I leaned against the counter. Then don't ask me to pretend 2 versions are one. The pause lasted several seconds. When Mom spoke again, her voice had changed. Your father would be ashamed of you. The kitchen seemed to go silent around me. Not quiet. Silent. My hand tightened around the phone. Dad had been dead for 6 years, but there were still places inside me where his disapproval could arrive before reason. I saw the funeral home again. The beige carpet. Mom sitting between conversations while I kept track of who needed death certificates, which accounts required copies, which relatives needed airport pickups, which food trays had been delivered. Brooke had been wrecked. Mom barely ate. So I functioned. 3 days after the funeral, Mom had held me in the kitchen and whispered, "I don't know what I'd do without you." For years, that memory had been precious. Proof that she saw what I carried. Standing in my own kitchen 6 years later, I understood why the sentence suddenly felt different. She had told me she did not know what she would do without me. She had not asked what all that carrying was doing to me. "Did you hear me?" Mom asked. "Yes. Your father believed in keeping this family together. Dad also isn't here to tell me what he thinks. How dare you? No. How dare you keep borrowing his voice when your own argument isn't working?" The words came out calmer than I felt. Mom went very still on the other end. Then she said, "You have changed." I closed my eyes. For most of my life, those words would have frightened me. They sounded different now. "I hope so." She hung up. The next morning, an email from Human Resources waited in my work inbox. I had been selected for a final interview for the director position. The proposed time was the following Thursday morning. At almost the same moment, a text from Mom appeared. "Come to the house Thursday morning. Brooke needs someone to talk sense into her before the family meeting." I looked from one screen to the other. The old calculations started automatically. Could I ask Human Resources to move the interview? Could I go to the house first? Could I schedule one at 8, one at 10, and spend the drive between them thinking about everybody except myself? My hand moved toward the keyboard, then stopped. I accepted the interview time. To Mom, I wrote, "I'm unavailable Thursday morning." She replied almost immediately. "For what?" I stared at the question. Normally, I would have explained. "Job interview. Important opportunity. Sorry. Can we do later?" Instead, "I have a commitment." Mom answered, "This is exactly what I mean. When your sister needs you, suddenly you're too busy." I put the phone face down. Thursday morning, I entered a conference room with 3 people from the university system and turned the device completely off. Not silent. Off. For 90 minutes, no one could summon me. The interview centered on how I approached conflict before it hardened into crisis. One interviewer asked, "What do you think weak systems rely on most?" The answer came to me before I had time to polish it. Usually 1 or 2 people everyone assumes will compensate for whatever the system refuses to fix. He tilted his head. "Can you give an example?" In workplaces, it can be the supervisor who absorbs every staffing failure, or the employee everyone calls because they never say no. It looks efficient until that person stops carrying it. Then you find out the system was never stable. The words settled inside me even after I finished answering. When the interview ended, I walked outside before turning my phone back on. 6 message. Nobody was in the hospital. Nobody had died. The house was still standing. For 90 minutes, everyone had survived without access to me. I laughed quietly in the parking lot. It felt absurd that something so small could feel like evidence. 2 days later, we met at Grandpa's house. Mom had invited Aunt Claire again without asking me. This time, I didn't object. If Mom wanted a witness, she could have one. Brooke sat at the end of the dining table. She looked tired but alert, her phone face down beside her. Mom occupied Grandpa's old chair. I noticed that immediately. Once, seeing her there might have made the room feel like hers. Instead, it made me remember how often a chair could be mistaken for authority. Aunt Claire gave me a careful smile. "I hope we can all stay calm." "I'm calm," I said. Mom folded her arms. "Then maybe we can stop treating this like an investigation." I placed a folder on the table. "I'm not here to investigate anyone. That's not how it feels. I'm here to decide what happens next with a jointly owned property." Brooke looked at the folder. Mom looked at me. "I still can't believe you talk about your grandfather's home like that. Calling it property doesn't erase Grandpa. It erases what he wanted. What he recorded is in the folder." Her mouth tightened. I opened it. "The current record shows you own half. I own half." Aunt Claire shifted. Mom didn't. The appraisal came back at approximately $815,000. Brooke's eyes widened slightly. Mom said, "There it is." "What?" "The money." I closed the appraisal. "No. The number matters because we need realistic options." I placed the first page on the table. You can buy my share if financing makes sense. The second page. I can consider buying yours if that is something you genuinely want and it works financially. The third. Or we can sell. Mom stared at the pages, as if I had placed an insult in front of her. And if I refuse all three? Then I'll get advice about the formal process available to co-owners. Aunt Claire spoke softly. Couldn't you just leave things as they are for a while? I looked toward Brooke. How long? Claire hesitated. A few months. And then? No one answered. That was the problem with every request that I wait. It never contained an end. Mom leaned forward. You're pretending this is about procedure because you don't want to admit what you're doing to your sister. Brooke shifted in her chair. I said, what exactly am I doing to her? You're threatening her home. I have never told Brooke she has to leave today. But you will. If we sell, everyone will have to make new arrangements. Mom turned immediately toward Brooke. Do you hear that? After everything I've done for you, she's willing to put you out. Brooke looked down. The old impulse struck so hard I could almost taste it. Tell her. Tell Mom she is wrong. Tell Brooke to confirm the messages. Make Brooke choose. For once, let the favored daughter say I was the one telling the truth. I looked at my sister. You don't have to choose me. Brooke's head came up. Mom stared. I felt my pulse beating at the base of my throat. And I'm not competing with her for you anymore. Mom's face went blank. Aunt Claire looked between us. Brooke said nothing. I continued. This isn't a vote on which daughter deserves the house. There are two owners. We have choices. Pick one to discuss. Mom's chair scraped backward. You think this is about choosing between you? It has been for years. That is ridiculous. Then it should be easy to stop. Her eyes flashed. I gave both of you everything. No one is asking you to rank what you gave us. You have always resented what Brooke got. The accusation once would have dragged me into a list. Tuition. Rent. Second chances. Every holiday, when Brooke's mistake became sensitivity, and my reaction became the real offense. I did not list any of it. Maybe I have resented things. Mom blinked. But that still doesn't change the deed. Her mouth opened. Closed. Then, she looked at Brooke. Are you going to sit there and let her do this? Brooke rubbed one thumb along the edge of her phone. Mom's voice cracked with anger. After everything I've done for you? I stood. Mom pointed at my chair. Sit down. No, we are not finished. I am. If you walk out that door, don't expect me to keep chasing after you. I picked up my bag. I'm leaving the meeting. I'm not leaving the facts. Naomi. I stopped at the doorway but did not turn around. We'll keep the property discussion in writing. I'll give you time to consider the three options. You don't dictate deadlines to your mother. No. I set limits on how long I leave my own life unresolved. Then I left. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting my cheeks. My hands shook when I reached the car. Not because I regretted leaving, because some part of me still expected punishment for walking away before Mom dismissed me. I sat behind the wheel until the trembling eased. Then I drove home. 2 hours later, Brooke texted, "Can I send you something?" I stared at the message. Yes. Several screenshots arrived. Not cropped pieces this time. Full threads with dates. The first message from Mom was from before the locks had been changed. Don't ask Naomi again. She'll make it complicated. The next came 3 days later. Get yourself settled first. Once you're living there, Naomi will never make you leave. My breath caught. Then another. She always gives in when somebody needs her. I read the sentence until the words lost their shape. Mom had not needed to forge my signature to make her plan work. She had relied on something more dependable. Me. My habit of stepping in after the damage was already done. My inability to watch someone struggle when I knew I could solve it. My fear that saying no would make me cruel. Brooke sent another message. I didn't know she was counting on that. I typed. Neither did I. Then erased it. That wasn't true. Some part of me had always known. I simply used to call it being dependable. Brooke called. Her voice sounded raw when I answered. I'm moving out. I sat straighter. When? I found a short-term rental. I can move in next week. Can you afford it? Yes. The question had escaped before I could stop it. Brooke noticed. I can handle the deposit, Naomi. Okay. I'm not asking you to pay for anything. I know. No, you don't. You were about to. She was right. A strange laugh came out of me. Maybe. Brooke exhaled. I need to do this myself. Yes. The word felt different from the no on Grandpa's porch. Both mattered. I'll return the keys when I'm out, she said. Every copy? Yes. Thank you. A pause. Then Brooke said, I still think you're angry with me. I am. Fair. And you moving out doesn't erase what happened. I know. Okay. She waited, perhaps expecting something else. An offer. Reassurance. Pilan. I gave none. After we hung up, the condo felt unusually quiet. Instead of opening another document about the house, I grabbed my coat and drove to a home store a few blocks away. I had passed it dozens of times. Usually, I told myself there was no point buying anything nice for a rental. Temporary place. Temporary furniture. Temporary life, until some future version of stability arrived. I walked through the aisles slowly. There was a narrow bookshelf made of dark wood that would fit perfectly beside the window in my living room. I stood in front of it for several minutes. Then I bought it, not because I needed storage. Because I had books stacked in boxes from my last move, still waiting for me to decide where I belonged. That evening, I assembled the shelf on my living room floor, while my phone stayed in the kitchen. When I finished, I placed the first book on it. Then the second. Then another. My phone buzzed. A new group chat. Mom. Brooke. Me. Mom's message appeared first. Brooke, call me privately. Naomi does not need to be part of this. I stared at the screen. Before I could decide whether to respond, another message appeared. Brooke, if it concerns both of us, say it here. My hand went still around the phone. For years, Mom had been able to tell me who Brooke was. And tell Brooke who I was. She had carried words between us, changing just enough each time to keep both daughters standing on opposite sides of the same door. Now the door was open. For the first time, Mom would have to speak where both of us could hear her. Brooke moved out 8 days later. I knew because she told me she had, not because I drove past Grandpa's house to check. That distinction mattered more than I expected. For years, information about Brooke had arrived through Mom. Brooke was struggling. Brooke needed help. Brooke had made a mistake but was too embarrassed to call. Brooke would appreciate it if I handled something quietly. This time, her text came directly to me. I'm out. Can I bring the keys tomorrow? I answered with a time. Nothing else. The next afternoon, Brooke arrived at Grandpa's house before I did. Her SUV was parked at the curb when I pulled up, but there was no moving truck now, no furniture stacked on the porch, no evidence of someone claiming the place before anyone could ask questions. She sat on the front steps with a paper coffee cup between both hands. When I walked toward her, she stood. I have everything, she said. She held out a key ring. Front door, back door, garage remote, mailbox key. I checked them without apologizing for checking. All the copies? All of them. Thank you. She didn't let go of the ring immediately. I need to say something. I waited. Brooke looked toward the street instead of at me. Mom told me you gave up the house. I know. But that isn't the whole reason I moved in. The keys pressed into my palm. She swallowed. I wanted it. I said nothing. I'd just lost the apartment with Evan. My business was uneven. Mom kept saying this was my chance to stop struggling. Brooke rubbed her thumb against the cardboard sleeve around her coffee. When she said you had already walked away from it, I didn't call you because I was afraid you would tell me she was wrong. That would have been a good reason to call. I know. Her voice had none of the sharpness from the porch the first day. She continued. And what I said about being the daughter who deserved it more was cruel. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice level. Yes. Brooke looked at me then. No defense. No explanation. I'm sorry. For most of my life, apologies in our family came with an invisible request attached. Tell me it's fine. Make me feel better. Restore the room to normal. I didn't do that. I appreciate you naming what you did. Her face changed slightly. You're not going to say it's okay? No. She nodded after a moment. Fair. That was the first apology between us that did not end with me taking responsibility for the other person's discomfort. Brooke stepped off the porch. I signed a 3-month lease. You found something that fast? A furnished place near Middleton. It's not glamorous. You can cover it? Her eyebrows lifted. The question had slipped out again. I almost followed it with an offer. Instead, I stopped. Brooke noticed. Yes, she said. I can cover it. Good. She gave me a tired smile. You're really trying not to rescue me. I'm discovering it takes practice. That's mildly insulting. It wasn't meant to be. I know. She walked to her SUV, then turned back. Mom hasn't spoken to me since I moved out. The old machinery inside me started up immediately. Call Mom. Smooth things over. Remind her, Brooke is upset. Fix the fracture before it becomes permanent. I closed my fingers around the returned keys. That's between you and her. Brooke stared at me for a second. Then she nodded. Right. After she drove away, I went inside. The house was quiet enough that I could hear the old refrigerator cycle on. For the first time since this started, nobody was living there. Nobody was using occupancy as leverage. Nobody could look at me and say, but where will Brooke go? I stood in the foyer holding both the old brass key Grandpa had given me and the newer set Brooke had returned. A month earlier, that would have felt like victory. Instead, all I could think was how much power we had assigned to doors. Who could open them? Who had to knock? Who was told to leave? I locked the house and went home. Mom did not respond to the property options by the date I had given her. A few years earlier, that would have triggered panic. I would have assumed silence meant I had been too harsh. I would have called with a softened version. Maybe we could extend the timeline. Maybe I could research financing for you. Maybe we could leave things alone until Brooke is settled. I did none of those things. I waited until the next business day and sent one written follow-up. Grandpa's attorney had reviewed the wording because I wanted the choices described accurately. He did not tell me which one to make. He did not threaten Mom on my behalf. The decision was mine. I stated that I was still open to a voluntary buyout if financing was realistic, or a voluntary sale. If we could not reach an agreement, I would need to consider the formal options available to co-owners. No insults. No countdown clock. No promise to destroy anyone. Just a boundary with an end. Mom replied that evening. You're unbelievable. I read it while standing beside the bookshelf I had assembled after the family meeting. Half of my books were finally out of boxes. For once, I did not translate her sentence into instructions. You're unbelievable did not mean call. It did not mean apologize. It did not mean change the proposal. I put the phone down and kept arranging books. 2 weeks later, the furnace at Grandpa's house stopped working properly. Mom called shortly after 7 in the morning. I was pouring coffee before work. Naomi, the furnace is making a horrible noise. Did you call the service company? I'm calling you. I heard that. You know the contractor who handled the last repair. Yes. So call him. I looked at the steam rising from my mug. There were few tasks I could solve faster. The number was in my phone. The contractor knew me. 10 minutes, and the problem would become mine. Mom mistook my silence for agreement. Tell him it needs to be today because the temperature is supposed to drop tonight. The number is in the house file. A pause. What? The service company's number. It's in the folder in the kitchen cabinet. You have it in your phone. I do. So why wouldn't you just call? Because you're the one arranging the repair. Her voice went flat. You own half the house. Yes. And suddenly maintenance is only my problem? If we have an ownership expense we need to share, send me the invoice and we can deal with it appropriately. Scheduling a service call doesn't require me. This is petty. No. This is you making a phone call. I cannot believe what you've become. I took a sip of coffee. There's the number in the file. So you're just going to leave me to handle it? The answer used to terrify me. Yes. Mom hung up. I arrived at work on time. Nothing happened to the furnace that became my responsibility. Later that day, Mom sent the paid service invoice into the shared property email thread. I reviewed it. A legitimate repair. I paid my appropriate share without commentary. That felt more important than refusing to call. A boundary was not refusing every responsibility. It was knowing which responsibilities were actually mine. 3 weeks passed. Then 4. Brooke stayed in her short-term rental. Mom still did not have financing that made a buyout workable for her. I had run the numbers on buying her half myself, but by then something had changed inside me. Every time I imagined owning Grandpa's house outright, I saw the old dining table, the funeral paperwork, Brooke's moving boxes, Mom sitting in Grandpa's chair demanding that one daughter prove love by surrendering to the other. I could afford to explore buying the property. I no longer wanted to. That surprised me. For weeks I had defended my half as if defending it meant I must eventually possess the whole thing. Then, one Sunday morning, while eating breakfast beside my new bookshelf, I understood the difference. I wanted the right to decide. I did not necessarily want the house. So when Mom eventually called and said, "What if you bought me out?" I was ready. I considered it. "And? I don't want to." She sounded stunned. "You've spent all this time fighting for it. I spent this time refusing to give away my ownership. What's the difference? The choice." Silence. Then Mom said, "So, now you want to sell Grandpa's home to strangers? I want us to sell an asset neither of us can agree to keep. You make it sound so easy." It isn't easy. For once, I meant that without needing to make the difficulty disappear. Eventually, Mom agreed to list the house. Not because she apologized. Not because she suddenly agreed I had been treated unfairly. Because the practical alternatives had narrowed. Brooke was not returning. I was not giving away my share. Mom could not comfortably buy me out under terms she was willing to accept. Keeping an expensive house empty while paying taxes, insurance, utilities, and maintenance did not turn sentiment into a plan. We chose a realtor after comparing several proposals. That process took time. So did preparing the house. So did showings. An offer fell through after financing complications. The next one survived inspection. By then, nearly 5 months had passed since my key first stopped in the lock. During those months, something strange happened. The less I talked about the dispute, the more Mom's story began collapsing without my help. Aunt Claire called one evening. "I need to ask you something." I was walking home from dinner with Elena and 2 people from work. We had started meeting once a month after I realized I had spent years declining invitations because I kept evenings available for emergencies that might never happen. "What is it?" I asked. "Your mother told me you had already agreed to give Brooke your part of the house before she moved in." "I hadn't." Claire was quiet. "She said you changed your mind after you saw what the house was worth." "That isn't what happened." "So there was never an agreement?" "No." Another pause. "I defended her to you." "You did." "I'm sorry. A familiar urgerose." "It's fine. You didn't know. Don't worry about it." Instead, I said, "Thank you." Claire exhaled slowly. "I still think this could have been handled with less conflict. Maybe the old version of me would have heard that as an assignment. Prove I handled it perfectly. Convince Claire. Win the last undecided juror." "Maybe," I said. She seemed surprised. "That's it?" "That's it." After we hung up, I went back inside the restaurant because Elena had texted that I had left my scarf on the chair. The conversation with Claire did not ruin dinner. It did not become the night. That was new too. A week before closing, Human Resources called. The Director of Conflict Systems position was mine if I wanted it. I stood beside the window in my office while the offer was explained. Higher salary. Expanded scope. Travel between campuses. A chance to build procedures that addressed recurring conflict before it became a crisis. "I'd like to accept," I said. The words came easily. No call to Mom first. No calculation about whether being less available would disappoint her. No promise that I could still drop everything. When Elena heard, she leaned into my doorway with a grin. "Congratulations." "Thank you. Did you make the decision before inventing 3 reasons you're needed elsewhere?" "Only 2. I'll take the progress." So did I. The closing on Grandpa's house happened several weeks later. The sale proceeds were divided according to ownership, after ordinary transaction expenses and the costs that needed to be settled. Mom received her share. I received mine. No one was ruined. No one was hauled into court. No fortune mysteriously vanished from one person's account and appeared in another's. Yet when the final walkthrough came, I knew Janice had lost something she valued more than the money. The house could no longer be awarded. She could no longer point to its front door and decide which daughter belonged inside. I walked through alone before turning over the last key. The rooms seemed smaller, empty. Without furniture, sound bounced off the walls. In the dining room, pale rectangles marked where pictures had protected the paint from years of sunlight. I ran my fingers over a nick in the baseboard. Grandpa had once caught me kneeling beside a crack in the foundation wall with a tape measure and notebook. "You notice what people hope nobody else notices," he had said. At the time, I thought he was talking about cracks in old houses. Maybe he was. It did not matter. The sentence belonged to me now. I crossed the foyer. The old brass key rested in my palm. For years, that key had meant access, then exclusion, then proof that something had changed without my consent. I placed it on the kitchen counter, with the keys being surrendered at closing. I did not keep it as a trophy. Some doors did not need to remain open to matter. The townhouse I bought 3 months later was nowhere near $800,000. It had 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, a little patio, and a mortgage that fit comfortably within my new salary, even without touching most of the money from the sale. I kept a real emergency fund for myself. That felt almost rebellious. The second bedroom became an office. At the furniture store, the salesperson pointed toward a sleeper sofa. "They're great if you have family staying over." I almost laughed. No sofa belle. I chose a desk, 2 bookcases, a reading chair wide enough for me to curl into on Saturday mornings. Nothing in the room waited for someone else's emergency. My calendar changed too. Monthly dinner with Elena and coworkers. Coffee with an old friend I had canceled on too many times. A mentoring program for newer mediators at work. None of it looked dramatic. That was the point. My life had spent so many years proving its usefulness that ordinary pleasure sometimes felt irresponsible. I learned otherwise, by repetition. Brooke and I did not become close overnight. She paid for her own apartment when the short-term lease ended. She did not ask me to finance her business. She did not ask me to convince Mom to speak to her. Sometimes we had coffee. Sometimes 3 weeks passed without a conversation. Trust grew in small, almost boring pieces. One afternoon, she said, "I think I used to call you controlling whenever you made it harder for me to avoid consequences." I stirred my coffee. Sometimes I was controlling. Brooke smiled faintly. "That's annoyingly fair." Occupational hazard. 9 months after the day I found her moving into Grandpa's house, an email from Mom arrived. I almost deleted it. Then I saw the subject. "No emergency." I opened it. She wrote that she had told Brooke I had given up the house when I had not. She admitted she told me Brooke had no options because she knew I would feel responsible. Then came the sentence I read 3 times. "I used the fact that you always came back." There was no request for money. No accusation. No demand that I call before bedtime. I did not answer that day. The next evening, I sat at the desk in the room that belonged to no one's emergency but mine, and wrote back. I told her that if we ever rebuilt a relationship, it would not happen through Brooke. It would not happen through relatives sent to pressure me. A real crisis would be treated like a crisis, but discomfort would no longer be renamed an emergency to cross my boundaries. And an apology would not erase what happened. I ended with one sentence. "If things change, I'll know by what you do next." Then I sent it. I did not write "I forgive you." Maybe one day I would. Maybe I would not. For the first time, either possibility belonged to me. That night, I came home after work and locked the townhouse door behind me. The key slid smoothly from the lock. I hung it on the small hook I had installed beside the entryway. One key. My key. No one else could change the lock, because they had decided another daughter deserved the room more. My phone buzzed. "Brooke, Mom asked me to tell you something." I stared at the message. The old pattern appeared so quickly, I almost laughed. Then, another text arrived. "I told her if she wants you to know, She can tell you herself. I stood there with my coat still on. A smile spread across my face. Not because Brooke had chosen me. That was the part I would once have misunderstood. She had not chosen me over Mom. She had chosen not to stand between us. And I had stopped needing either of them to decide what I was worth. I put my phone on the table without answering immediately. Then I walked into my office, settled into the reading chair, and opened a book. For most of my life, being the strong daughter had meant being available whenever someone else needed something. Now strength felt quieter. A locked door I had chosen. A career I had stopped postponing. Money that did not automatically become somebody else's safety net. Relationships that did not require one person to disappear for the others to feel secure. The house was gone. Grandpa's deed was filed away. Mom still had work to do that I could not do for her. Brooke and I were learning how to speak without an interpreter. And for the first time, none of that felt like a problem I had been assigned to solve. It felt like my life,